need to introduce him much because he is already a known figure. Uh, Dr. Siddharth Lakhani is MD Medicine, DM, DNB Nephrology, and he is practicing as a consultant nephrologist and transplant physician across the Mumbai. To be very specific, South Mumbai and central part of the Mumbai. So today he will be speaking about the medical and dietary management of management in CKD. So I just hand over the session to Dr. Siddharth Lakhani. Before that, sir, I just want to tell everyone that we'll be having 20 minutes of this presentation, 20-25 minutes, and last 10 minutes we have kept for the question and answers, if any. So Dr. Siddharth Lakhani, yeah.
Yeah, hope I'm able to hear to all of you. Yeah, so I'll be discussing as discussed. Thank you for a warm introduction and thank you all for joining. It's so nice to see all my known faces after long we are meeting probably. So I will just run through some basic things. So CKD, basic medical management and dietary management. How we define, as all of us know, any abnormal kidney structure or kidney function. Will go to a definition of CKD that has to persist for more than 3 months. It's very important to define that patient is chronic kidney disease or no. Many times it is missed. A chronic diabetic, long-standing with a significant albuminuria for more than 3 months goes into your CKD 1 or 2. So you have to define them. Unless you label them or unless you tell them that you are a chronic kidney disease, it may be difficult for them also to know. So that is important. Secondary, yes, any abnormal urinary sediments, any abnormal urinary or probably electrolyte imbalance, chronic hyponatremia, chronic hypokalemia may also be a part of tubular dysfunction. Abnormality is detected by histopathology, all our nephrotic syndromes if they persist. And of course, structural imaging. So all horseshoe kidney, solitary kidney probably. So they all go into a definition of CKD. So I'll not go into the details of causes of CKD. We all know a lot of congenital causes, glomerular causes, vascular causes, tubular interstitial causes, and urinary tract obstruction, of course. So these are all common cases which we see in our day-to-day practice. Uh, how we go for management? Many times the question is asked. I think all of us know in and out every time what are the drugs used by everyone. Sovosis or probably an N-acetylcysteine or probably a bicarb supplements. So what is important is you have to define or you have to tell the patient that we are going to take your treatment into two parts. So one is of course managing the complications of chronic kidney disease and second is to prevent the progression of CKD. So it has to be very clear in your mind that you're going to treat both the parts simultaneously and not leave any of one of them. So we'll just start with complications. So as all of us know, we'll just discuss some common complications of chronic kidney disease. One is anemia. Second is mineral bone disease. Third is a cardiovascular disease. Fourth is malnutrition. Fifth is acidosis. Sixth is not a complication, but yes, drug dosing, a very important part of management of chronic kidney disease. And of course, treating and correcting the infections or a chronic inflammation stage and immunization. So these are basic headlines under which we will be talking. Just to probably just give a basic of anemia and chronic kidney disease. So most of the times erythropoietin, important organ or probably important hormone which is secreted, which probably stimulates your bone marrow for correcting or increasing the RBC formations. So with CKD, what happens is there is a significant erythropoietin deficiency. In CKD, you will also see bone marrow fibrosis that will be most often seen in secondary or tertiary hyperparathyroidism. And of course, there is a decreased lifespan because there is significant blood loss during dialysis. So this is how a common anemia picture in CKD will be. And all of us know basic definitions are probably a deficiency of B12, folate, or iron deficiency. So these are common causes. With this, we will not be going into details of this thing. Most important factor is before starting erythropoietin or before correcting anemia in all CKD patients, it is important for all our family physicians as we diagnose a case of anemia in a routine day-to-day practice, you have to diagnose and classify each anemia in CKD as well. Define anemia, number one, find out the cause of anemia. So most common thing is what is the type of anemia in CKD? All of us, most of the times we have a query whether it's a macrocytic or it's a microcytic or a megaloblastic anemia basically. It's a normocytic normochromic anemia. So we have to be clear in our mind that it's a normocytic normochromic or an anemia of chronic disease as we define. So once you are through that, you are not having any iron deficiency, no B12 or folate deficiency, then we decide what is erythropoietin is to be started. So if asked for, I've discussed this already with you. So yes, so asked for whenever a patient of CKD with anemia is there, you will always ask for a complete blood count. Very important to know RBC indices, MCV, MCH, MCHC, which most of us is forgotten these days to see a ferritin level or an iron complete iron study to see transferrin saturation as well. B12 levels, folate levels. So we don't do folate levels for all. We will get B12 levels if we have a MCH or an MCV probably higher. Other investigations, as we know for all of us, we know should rule out any chronic inflammatory state by getting a basic CRP, occult blood stool if there is a history of ulcer or a black stool, and of course a peripheral smear if you are suspecting probably any other blood cell dyskaryosis. So iron, very important part of CKD therapy. All of us will agree. A lot of iron preparations are available in market, and a lot of us are aware of multiple preparations available. Question is when to give IV. Many of my family physicians or probably doctors usually prefer not to give IV therapy in iron because we have all been seeing multiple IV reactions or anaphylactic reactions to iron. And second is an oral preparation. So when to use what, and really whether the patient is to be given iron or no, that is an important part. So we see that if when is the iron to be supplemented, if on your iron study you find that your TSAT, transferrin saturation, is less than 20, number one, or your serum iron load is less than 30, these are the two things, or your ferritin is less than 150. So these are the criteria where we decide that patient has iron deficiency. Usually in oral versus iron, we prefer giving oral iron therapy for patients who are probably stage 1 to 3. Uh, Usually there is not much chronic inflammation in this stage. Beyond stage 3, there is a lot of inflammation in the gut, and oral iron absorption may be very poor, and that is why these patients also may are already having mild uremic symptoms. They may have malnutrition, they may be having nausea, vomiting, and on that giving iron will cause a lot of constipation, will cause taste change, and they may have excessive symptoms. So these iron patients are usually preferred for IV iron. So all of us know basic iron preparations available: iron dextran, iron sucrose, ferric gluconate. We have the newer ones, ferric carboxy maltose, which is commonly available now in market. What are the differences? Is of course anaphylactic reaction is much higher with dextran, much lesser with your IV sucrose, and much lesser with the ferric carboxy maltose. So dosage, yeah. So what are the dosages available? Whenever we are going to treat, we usually prefer giving a loading dose of 1 gram. So that is why if you're going to use an IV iron sucrose, it's available as 100 or 200 milligram total concentration in each of your vial. So if you're going to use that, we are going to give 200 milligrams for 5 dosages. That doses can be completed into a period of 2 to 4 weeks. So either you can give it as alternate or every third day over a span of 15 days, 5 doses. Or if a patient probably is, if you want, you can give it at a span of 1 weekly also. So 1 gram loading, and then the patient can be continued if at all required on a maintenance therapy. That could be done by a simple iron preparation, oral also. A benefit of using ferric carboxy maltose preparation is it's because of the structure of that drug, the anaphylactic reaction is much lesser. Benefit is, of course, you can give 1 or 2 doses maximum because it's available as 500 milligram injection. There are few companies which are even making 1000 milligrams. So just one dose and you are through. Otherwise, the patient has to come every time and take IV irons from you, which is sometimes difficult. So coming towards ISA. So ISA is basically a erythropoietin stimulating agent. You have a lot of options available here. So as we discussed, iron should be always first. Once you correct the iron, then only we should go ahead with ISA or erythropoietin stimulating agents. What is the target hemoglobin when the erythropoietin should be started is usually less than 10. And whenever a patient is on ISA therapy or erythropoietin therapy, I want my hemoglobin to be around 10 to 11.5. I don't want it to chase beyond 12 or 12.5. There is a gray zone between 11.5 to 13 because there are no specific guidelines on that. Beyond 13, definitely you stop all the erythropoietin stimulating agents. So what are the options available to us whenever we are considering erythropoietin stimulating agents are your erythropoietin number 1, darbepoetin number 2, and third is Mircera, that is methoxy polyethylene dicol beta. So that's one more thing. So for CKD5D, basically on dialysis, we suggest either IV or subcute administration. Both have equal efficacy. Of course, whenever you're seeing non-dialysis patient or a peritoneal dialysis patient, these patients are not going to go to hospitals regularly. So for them, definitely subcute is better. As I discussed, any specific, what are the target levels for renal patient? Always the question is asked, what should be the target hemoglobin where I should be targeted? As I said, most of the times we want it between 10 and 11.5, but each case should be individualized. If a patient is cardiac patient and patient still has on 10 hemoglobin, has symptoms of dyspnea, have symptoms of fatigue, it would not be harm to probably go up to 12 or probably sometimes up to 13 also. So there are certain cases of even hyporesponsiveness or not responding to erythropoietin or ESA agents. You should rule out all other cases as we discussed earlier. All the findings should be found out. Why? What is the reason? Is there significant iron deficiency? Is there B12 deficiency? Is there severe inflammation or infection? Most of the times, I think all of us will agree, if a patient is on a catheter because of chronic inflammation and probably some underlying continuous inflammation and infection, the hemoglobins never rise till the time patient is on a temporary catheter, not the pump cath what we are talking about. Uh, so once a patient starts dialysis on fistula, the hemoglobin starts improving and the patient's quality of life is much better than what a patient of quality of life is on a catheter. That is why it is advised to refer patients early to us so we can plan a fistula for them. Most of the time patient comes beyond 7 or 8 creatinine, it's almost near to dialysis. So it's always better to refer them whenever they are GFR less than 30 so that we can have adequate time to plan their fistula. Earlier, there were side effects of erythropoietin, influenza like probably syndrome. Hypertension is one known side effect, probably because of excessive blood stimulation. And very rarely they used to see earlier pure red cell aplasia. That was because of albumin, which was used as a probably a stabilizing agent in this erythropoietins. So, second important factor is of course uh, chronic anemia. Whenever we are seeing, most of the times we have seen physicians, family physicians having a habit of transfusing these patients on and off. So we should avoid transfusion. There is a chronic anemia. These patients are much stable and they are happy on their hemoglobin levels whenever it is. So don't give them transfusions unless it is compulsory or unless they are symptomatic. Number one, why? Of course, all of us know blood transfusions is going to transmit them some or the other infection. That is one. Second is most of the times these patients could be probably an organ transplantation. So giving them probably blood may be increasing their chances of allosensitization. They may already produce some antibodies and that may be difficult. So that is one point. Coming towards mineral bone disease, very important topic. Same, lot of CKDs, chronic dialysis patients. You will see a lot of calcium, phosphorus, PTH, and vitamin D3 abnormalities. And these patients are classically of probably osteodystrophies, and we start having pathological fractures. So it is important to know, at least from my family physician point of view, is how are we going to manage them. Most of the times, the question is whether to use calcium acetate. Number one, whether to use number two is sevelamer or a non-calcium based phosphorus binding agent. Number three, when to use active vitamin D, that is calcitriol. And number four is when to use folic acid. So these are four questions I think all of us will agree, which is there in a CKD patient. So I would prefer probably not going by the classical charts. We could just probably discuss what is to be done if I'm supposed to manage my calcium phosphorus levels. What we do in our practice is simple. I see my calcium levels, I see my phosphorus levels. Each patient of CKD, once his GFR is less than 45, should be advised a PTH. If the PTH is in normal range, you can do it every 6 monthly. If it's high, you can do it every 6 to 12 weekly. So all PTH, all patients of CKD stage 3 onwards will have secondary hyperparathyroidism. Why? Because there is a chronically low calcium in this patient and there is a high phosphorus in this patient. which will keep on stimulating the parathyroid, and that is why you'll have a parathyroidism, number one. That's a secondary hyperparathyroidism. There will always be a hypocalcemia and hyperphosphatemia. So what to correct? First is never trace immediately the PTH. First hero to be corrected is the phosphorus. Always see whenever you're seeing these three values, and fourth value is 25 hydroxy D3. So the calcium, vitamin D levels. So any patient who is 25 hydroxy D3 deficiency can receive straightforward cholecalciferol. There is no contraindication. 60,000 unit, as all of us use once a week, somewhere between 8 to 12 weeks. It's the recommended dosage. You don't need to worry for your calcium phosphorus levels. Whenever you are having a deficiency, the guideline says replace. Now come towards calcium, phosphorus, and PTH. First, see the calcium phosphorus levels. If I'm seeing a hypocalcemia and hyperphosphatemia, first I need to correct is my phosphorus levels, as I said, number one. If my correcting my phosphorus levels, if my calcium is low and my PTH is already very high, I'm going to use a calcium-based phosphorus lowering agent, that is calcium acetate, number one. So that's available as either Septacal, Lanum, or your Dofos. So these are common brands. I'm not promoting any specific brand here. So these are three basic things which are available. So you need to get the phosphorus. Once you have a phosphorus between 4.5 and 5, then you can stop or decrease the dose of phosphorus lowering agent. Secondly, when I'm seeing a high phosphorus and a high calcium, probably the PTH may be around 200s or so. So there I'm going to give a non-phosphorus, probably non-calcium based phosphorus lowering agent. That is my Sevlamar. So Sevlamar carbonate or Sevlamar chloride. We used to use chloride earlier, but chloride forms can cause sometimes acidosis. So carbonate form is more preferred. Okay, so this is how we go. So I will not go into the details just to complicate things. I think simple things are easy. So as I said, secondary hyperparathyroidism will have increased PTH, low calcium, low phosphorus. So what is the product? As I said, calcium phosphorus to be seen. If the phosphorus product and calcium product is very high, you should be aware that don't use too much of calcium because there are chances of calciphylaxis, deposition of calcium in the skin and the vascular structures. This is how they look. We don't go into the range. I have discussed these three. So we discussed phosphate binders, which are calcium based, like your calcium acetate. They used to have earlier aluminiums, which we don't use nowadays because of aluminum toxicity. Very severe phosphatemia, not responding to something. Sometimes we still use, but not at the level of physician. So that is one. Sevlamar bicarbonate, I discussed already. Second is lanthanum. Lanthanum also is used as an anti-phosphorus agent, not so significantly available in the market. Next, we go to vitamin D analogs. So we discussed whenever there is a cholecalciferol deficiency, you should definitely treat it. Whenever I'm seeing a hypocalcemia along with hyperphosphatemia, I'm going to use a calcium-based phosphate binding agent along with an active vitamin D3. If I already have an hypercalcemia, hyperphosphatemia, I don't use a calcitriol binding agent. That is how we decide that. Third is sinacalcet, probably one more drug used in management of this. This is most of the times used in patients with severe hyperparathyroidism. So even in dialysis patients, I don't know all of how many of you have seen. We have seen 3,000, 4,000. This is the range of parathyroids what we have seen. Normal range is less than 60. So this is where we add a phosphate binding agent, we add a calcitriol, and then we add a sinacalcet. So there is a third thing where the parathyroid is very high. So just a chart to know when to manage when. So serum calcium and phosphorus levels in the stage 3 every 6 to 12 monthly required. If a baseline level is available, which is normal, we don't do PTH regularly. In stage 4, calcium phosphorus every 3 to 6 monthly, PTH 6 to 12 monthly, depending on the levels. And of course, in a dialysis stage, calcium's every 1 to 6 weeks to 12 weekly, and PTH also probably 3 to 6 months. So into this. Common things all of us know. Cardiac can cause renal, renal can cause cardiac. That is why they have a syndrome called as cardiorenal syndrome. So multiple types. CRS, very theory, viva topics for all probably physicians as well as this thing. Multiple factors which are there in CKD can have an effect of heart, and multiple common heroes also like diabetes, obesity, NSAID hypertension, dyslipidemia. These are known to cause atherosclerosis, and that is how they are known to cause a chronic kidney damage, also are CKD. So they also label sometimes as cardio kidney damage because these are all factors which are going to affect both of them. So for a good cardiac condition, you need to have a good renal condition, and for a good renal condition, there must be a good cardiac condition. Malnutrition, all of us will agree why these patients are malnourished. There is a decreased appetite, definitely, and a decreased absorption. There is a continuous state of malnutrition or a continuous state of inflammation. There was a very well study done on MIA, malnutrition, inflammation, atherosclerosis syndrome. A lot of cytokines are released all the time during dialysis because there is a constant reaction between the blood and the dialyzer. A lot of anabolic hormones like inulin and probably growth hormones are not working well. Significant acidosis, uncorrected acidosis again causes malnutrition, and definitely all our family or probably dietary restrictions which we advise to patient leads them to malnourishment. So try avoiding probably significant low calorie diets for this patient. Always analyze their protein and calorie intake and then probably put them on specific diet. Don't just tell them ye mat khalo, wo mat khalo. That is sometimes dangerous. Always correct any inflammation process. If there is a indwelling infected catheter, try to correct that infection. If there is anemia, correct anemia. Acidosis, correct acidosis. And if there is inadequate dialysis, give adequate dialysis. Acidosis, all of us agree, common hero. Most of the times, many a times we have seen, even with patient with 1.3, 1.4 creatinine sometimes, there is a bicarb tablets going on. Avoid giving too much of bicarbs. These are known to cause on a longer term metabolic alkalosis, and metabolic alkalosis and bicarb itself can lead to bone disease. So yeah, it's difficult to get ABG all time, but most of the labs are these days doing venous bicarb levels. So whenever a patient is on a bicarb supplement, get a venous bicarb level or ask them to get sometimes a complete renal package or a renal large, RFT large, that has all the extra parameters. So target a bicarb between 22 and 24. So sorry, I'm not going to go into the detail of this. So most of the times we use oral bicarb. IV bicarb is unless it's a severe acidosis, pH less than 7.2, bicarb less than 10. Patient is having severe acidotic breathing. That is the time we use oral bicarb, IV bicarb. So as I said, bicarbs to be started only when it is less than 22. Target a pH range of 7.3, 7.5, and maintain a bicarb of 22 to 24. For all of us, most important topic, drug dosages. Please mention or please try to check patient's drug whenever you are seeing an unexpected rise of creatinine. So many times patients are referred and we see our patient is taking Septran, patient is taking telmisartan. So prefer. Most of the times we know what are the drugs which can cause increased creatinine. So ACE/ARBs, aldosterone inhibitors, NSAIDs, lithium. So just see what is the drug, and before giving any drugs to any probably a high risk patient, always get their creatinine values and try to get out a GFR value if possible. There are simple apps. QX calculator is a simple app available on the app store, either Google or probably Apple. So it's very easy to manage and calculate all the parameters there. Next important topic is infection and immunization. Yes, doing all diabetic or all probably CKD patients less than GFR 30 should be vaccinated with all these three: influenza, pneumococcal, and hepatitis B. Pandemic COVID has trained us that prevention is better than cure. So this is now we are running and dying for vaccine. Already the disease where there is vaccine available, please try to vaccinate them. Coming towards a short note on how to prevent the CKD progression. So all of us know the mortality, all cause and cardiovascular mortality is significantly high whenever you are seeing patient beyond stage 3. So what is important is complication management, of course, to give them a quality of life. But at the end of the day, when a patient is to me, I would always want my hard point. What is my hard end point? Hard end point would be whether I'm able to give an extra year to patient's life, whether I'm able to decrease his cardiovascular mortality. That is what is my aim. Just correcting anemia or just correcting acidosis is not going to help me treating a nephrology patient. So assure these are the factors to how we are going to prevent CKD progression. Strict glycemic control, HbA1c less than 6.5, significant blood pressure control, proteinuria less than 1 gram, BP less than 130/80. Diet, I would be going through some slides of diet, but an important part of dietary management in CKD is a low protein, low salt, low phosphorus, low potassium diet. This is what we tell them. Of course, easy to hear, difficult to understand. Prefer giving a low protein diet. So low protein will include all your meat products to go off if a patient is mixed diet intake. If it's a veggie, don't try to cut down all pulses. Just see, because most of the times vegetarians will have a already low protein diet. So stopping everything will not help. Hyperuricemia is important to correct hyperuricemia whenever you are seeing CKD. Hyperlipidemia is one more factor. So glycemic, as I said, BP also I discussed with you. Just going to run through some slides. So for all diabetics, prefer them that they remain on ACE or ARB whenever their protein is more than, or albumin creatine ratio is more than 30. So always prefer them on an ACE or ARB. These are the only recommended drugs which have shown significant increase in probably delaying the progression of CKD. Definitely that's one thing. But you have to monitor them. Yes, creatine values, potassium values, always important. Blood pressure targets for diabetic with proteinuria is always 130/80. So whenever there is more than 130/80, prefer starting them on therapy. And most of the times what I would say is target blood pressure to less than 130 in all the CKDs. Most of the times I see patient is on one drug and BP is 150/80. Patient says मेरे डॉक्टर ने बोला है कि blood pressure तुम्हारे उम्र के लिए इतना normal है, which is false. All patients, whatever, irrespective of their age, irrespective of their diseases, their blood pressure should be well controlled, whether it's on one drug or 4 drugs, less than 130/80. Diet I've already discussed, will not go into the details. Protein intake I've said. Most important part, less than 0.8 grams per kg per day in a CKD non-dialysis. In a CKD dialysis, it's around 1.2 grams per kg per day. We have a dietary team with us. Whenever we usually refer them for their strict, detailed available things. So that is one thing. I would probably rest my talk here. Any questions I'll be taking from here? Nare, I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, that's fine, sir. We'll be having questions now.
Yeah.
Siddharth, I have one question.
Yes.
You mentioned about that the protein should be loaded very carefully calculated. Some of these supplements which are available, renal resource, and I mean, just one I could remember. There are many more. Are they really safe?
So now coming, we have multiple protein supplements in CKD, which includes probably low protein and high protein. Always prefer having LP whenever you're giving in CKD non-dialysis patient, and these are to be given probably in patients whenever you are having, or patient is having a malnourished state. In CKD, many times even before dialysis, patient will have a very weak state, very poor intake. We don't give all patients. If a patient is able to take adequate oral or dietary protein, he should not be supplemented. It's a simple thing.
Okay. I wanted to be sure.
So I can see probably some questions in my chat. Probably I'll take one by one. Dr. Daftari says, should we give aspirin and statin to all CKD patients? Yes, statin is recommended for all CKD patients and aspirin as well. So whenever we are seeing a CKD with diabetes and blood pressure, both aspirin and statins should be started whenever a patient is more than 45 years of age, or whenever his cardiovascular score is more, probably they should be always given a benefit of statin and aspirin. So yes, it should be given. Any more questions?
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hello. Siddharth, what about fruits?
So in fruits, basically we give patients, we ask them to take apple, pear, papaya, pineapple in a non-diabetic patient. And a patient who's diabetic, usually, he'll be advised to have kacha pakka, papaya and apple. These are the only resources left with them. High potassium foods, they are usually your banana, chiku, and all citrus fruits, which are to be avoided for these patients. So we tell them not to take these high potassium foods. but that is only when their CKD stage beyond 3. Many times we have seen 1.5, 1.7, the patient says, "Humko sab kuch band kar diya." Which should not be the case, because at a GFR more than 45, your potassium balance is going to be absolutely correct. Where the patient may not require a significant low potassium diet in his dietary change. You can restrict the protein just to prevent progression of disease, but low potassium diet that time may not be advisable.
And what about fluid restriction?
Fluid restriction, yes, it's an important part. Fluid restriction only in patients who have edema. It's a very important part. Even in creatinine 10, a non-diabetic patient will not have edema and he may not require fluid restriction. Only when a patient starts having edema, that is the only time the edema may be due to a progressed CKD or maybe due to a low protein in the diet or low protein in the serum. That is the only time when we advise them to have a low protein diet or a low fluid intake, that's less than 1 liter a day. And dialysis patients, of course, always low water intake a day, but not otherwise. If a patient is creat 6, 7, 8, XYZ, whatever may be the value,
But
if
then
a patient is comfortable, no diuretics and no edema and no water restriction.
You don't measure the urine output and kind of see.
Not recommended. Not recommended. The urine output may vary individually, but till the time he's maintaining his creatinine values and till the time he's not getting edema, he is definitely euvolemic.
Great.
Sir, I just wanted to ask that can he have diuretic once in every 8-10 days or so if there is edema?
So Atman bhai, whenever we give any drug medicine to any patient, like if you're giving even paracetamol or if you're giving any antihypertensive drug also, there is a concept of Tmax. So Tmax is basically drug concentration in the body.
Yes.
So if I have to develop a Tmax or if I have to develop a specific drug concentration in my body, what is recommended is 5 half-lives of the drug. So if I'm seeing a drug with 24-hour half-life, I have to give 5 doses, so 5 days. So that is why we mention or we ask all patients of blood pressure, sugar to monitor their blood pressure after 5th or 7th day. Because we know that the effect of the drug is not going to happen immediately. So if my BP is 140/80 today, and if I take one amlodipine or one probably any drug, and my blood pressure is probably next value will be 120/70, and the drug effect fades off, again the blood pressure is going to go high. The same is the concept of diuretics. If you are going to use it, you have to use it in a specific period. Most important part is salt water restriction, which many of us probably avoid, and that is why we land up having edema. If at all required, if someone is having edema, you should take a low dose. 5 milligram of torsemide should not be a harm.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Sir, patient on ARB showing hyperkalemia, we have to change the ARB, it is okay.
Yeah, so whenever we are seeing a patient with hyperkalemia, never assure if the potassium is definitely more than 6, it will be recommended to temporarily stop the potassium ARB drug, whatever you're giving. Give them anti-kalemic measures, repeat a potassium level. You can use simple potassium binding agents, oral agents which are available. You can just use them. If there is a persistent hyperkalemia, then definitely patient should not be restarted. If there is no persistent hyperkalemia, patient can be restarted on the medicine. If a patient's potassium is between 5.5 and 6.5 or between 5.5 and 6 specifically for our family physicians, you can cut down the dose by 50%. You may not need to stop the drug completely.
But then, I was informed that sir, creatinine above 1.8 or 2, discontinue metformin and some ACE on ARB inhibitors. Is it true, sir?
No. So ACE and ARB is now, if you see, most of the time diabetic kidney patients may be at 1.82. So whatever foreign studies, we have so many literature available for enalapril, where they have given enalapril even in patients of CKD4 sometimes. So it will be false just depending on the value of creatinine. 1.8 for a 70-year-old maybe creatinine maybe CKD4 or 5. And 1.8 for a young male, 30-40 years, maybe a CKD 1 or 2. So the values will depend on not the value. You have to calculate the GFR. After starting ACE or ARB, always prefer starting at a lower dose
Yes.
And once you start at a lower dose, monitor the creatine. If the creatine jumps by more than 25 30%, then definitely you should stop it. If it is not a situation, if there is a heavy proteinuria, I think the drug should be continued.
Yes, and sir, metformin also.
Metformin, if the GFR is less than 30, yes, I prefer stopping them for all the patients.
Yes.
Between 30 and 45, if the patient is taking the drug, he should continue. I don't think there is. So as I said, values will not matter.
Values are not important.
Yeah, so it's the
is
GFR
important.
value, GFR, which will take a decision, not the creatine value per
Not
se.
the creatine. Sure. Thank you, sir.
Doctor, I think there are no more questions.
So thank you all of you for connecting me.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good to see all of you. Hope
Yes,
all of
sir.
you are safe and take care of yourself.
Yeah, on behalf of
safe.
company also, sir, thank you very much for wonderful presentation on this dietary management in CKD. I also
Thank
thanks
you
all
so
the
much.
attendees for patiently listening. Please take care of yourself. You're there in the field battling against COVID and you're risking your lives actually. So thank you very much for attending
Thank
and
you so
taking
much.
out some time. Thank you very much.
Thank you all of you. Guys.
Thank you.